Spring training is underway and games will be starting up this weekend for the Atlanta Braves. Joining the show today will be Grant McAuley to break down everything that he has seen so far in camp, talking about Acuña and Strider's progress, also the battle for the rotation, and much more on today's episode of Locked On Braves. So
you are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I'm your host, Jake Mastroianni. You can follow me on social media at ShortstopBall. Check out the podcast there at LockedOn_Braves. Check us out on Instagram now as well at Locked On Braves. Subscribe on YouTube if you're new. Hit that thumbs up button. Leave me a comment down below. And if you're listening on the audio version, you can help out by leaving me a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. On today's episode, I got Grant joining the show to talk about everything that he saw down in spring training for the Atlanta Braves, getting geared up for spring training games starting this weekend and the regular season in the not too distant future as well. So looking forward to that conversation. So let me go ahead and bring in Grant. As always, thank you so much for joining the show. Always love having you on, getting your insight and expertise and some firsthand knowledge as you've been down there in camp with the Braves for a little bit now. So Grant, thanks so much as always for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. And I will say this, and this won't be the biggest breaking news story of our discussion, but it was a lot warmer down in Northport than it's been in a lot of the rest of the portions of Braves country of the non-Florida variety.
Yeah, it's been a little rough up here. I mean, we got some snow, had snow flurries today where I am in Birmingham. It's I'm ready for baseball. I wish I could get down there as well to Northport in some warmer weather, but it'll be here before we know it. We'll all be complaining about how hot it is outside, but certainly we'll take that with some baseball going on as well. Well, Grant, I know you were down there in spring training for a little bit, talking to some of the guys, some of the players. First thing I really wanted to ask you is, what is kind of the vibe right now in the clubhouse and the players? Obviously, last year, a lot of talk was, the World Series or bust mentality that AJ Minter started out with, and others kind of tagged along with that. I know there was already some questions and discussion about that this year, and they said they weren't going to go down that road. But just, it's coming up it's hard to say it's a rough season. You won 89 games and made the postseason, but, for all intents and purposes, they didn't accomplish what they wanted to, and injuries had a lot to do with that. So I'm very curious, just what was the feeling and sense that you got from the team and the coaches and those down there as they got to spring training?
Yeah, I'd say one word would be renewal. Another word would be optimistic. And one of the biggest parts of that is they've finally been able to separate themselves from 2024 and all the narrative that went into the injuries and the underperformance. And when you set out with World Series or bust, I mean, let's be honest. There are a handful of clubs in Major League Baseball that pretty much is going to be the mantra. Now, do you need to say it? Do you need to state it? Do you need to put it on a T-shirt? Probably not. And I think that's kind of where Matt Olson, Austin Riley, some of the guys who were asked about the World Series or bust, look, it's not that they're ashamed that, we set up this, lofty goal and couldn't get it done, and maybe we shouldn't do that, but we don't really need to make any statements this year. Our expectation is to get to the postseason. I mean, Brian Snitker says this every single year. You hear it from any number of Atlanta Braves that we got to get there. And when we get there, we got the chance to do something special. And obviously, the last 3 years have been nothing close to the special variety that 2021 was. And I would say that winning the World Series, obviously, there's 30 clubs that would love to do it. If we're being honest, about half of those really have a good fighting chance to do so. But every once in a while, baseball surprised you with one of those crazy stories. And the Braves would have loved to have been that last year, overcome all those injuries, got to the postseason and make a run. But I think that they're happy to be able to turn the page on that completely and welcome back some major members of their club. I mean, we're talking about an MVP in Ronald Acuña Jr. We're talking about one of the best pitchers in baseball in Spencer Strider. And I know we can, rehash and reheat, if you will, no pun intended, the winter and what didn't happen for the Atlanta Braves in terms of a lot of player movement and signings and trades and all the other things to fill maybe some needs that this club would appear to still have. There's still an awful lot that there is to like about this club, the core of this club that is intact, and if healthy, what they're capable of doing this year. So that's probably the Reader's Digest version of what I saw and what I experienced and what I discussed with a lot of members of the Atlanta Braves. They are ready for the challenge of 2025. And if healthy, this is a club that I still think the sky is the limit. And we'll see what they're able to do to address maybe some of their needs. And, when exactly that happens and who in camp or who on this club, let's put it that way, can step up and help the Braves out in some areas where they could use some help and some upgrading over last year, or just flat out some better performances than they had a year ago. There's a little bit of that to go around as well.
Yeah, I think it is more than just saying better health. That's health. That's obviously a big part of it, but you need guys to kind of get back to the way that they were performing even before that too. But I'm right there with you, and I've stated all off season. This roster, it's still good enough to win a World Series. It's still good enough if they play like they're capable of, and if they stay healthy. And look, that's the question for every team. The Braves are coming off a season, and we as fans are coming off a season where we saw everybody get injured. So that's obviously top of mind, but every team says that going into the year. If we can stay healthy, we can reach our goals. But this team specifically, I still think on paper has a very talented roster up and down. As you said, one of those very few teams that can go with that mentality. They don't have to say it, but it is, we expect to win a World Series. We expect to get to the postseason. And this team certainly has the ability to do that. And Grant, I think one of the biggest reasons for optimism is their two best players that they played most of last year without. And to me, that is the most interesting storyline in spring training and something I'll be following closely. And that is obviously the health of Ronald Acuña Jr. and Spencer Strider. Love to get your thoughts on just what you saw from them, but also my take on this is kind of the outside is what I've heard from Alex Anthopoulos and what we've seen early on. It almost seems like these guys are healthy, on track, maybe could even start the season on the roster if needed to. But the sense that I get is there's just no reason to do that. There's no reason to push them. But everything, again, that I've heard from Alex and everything that I've seen says both Ronald and Strider are making good progress and look really good. That could, obviously change. But I want to get your sense on that as well. Do you think the Braves are just being extra cautious and delaying these guys? And how did they look to you in spring training?
Yeah, well, the answer to the last one is they both looked great. They sounded great, and they were in great spirits. And both of them physically, I think, have checked an awful lot of boxes to give you that feeling, like you were saying, that, well, maybe if you needed them, they could be there a little bit earlier. But the Braves have been very, I would say, meticulous about this. They wanted to make sure that the expectation didn't outweigh the importance of checking every single possible box to put them in the best chance to succeed. And they the team, but also each of those guys. Ronald Acuña Jr. is coming off of his second ACL repair, which means the first one is going to inform him a lot on how his body is going to respond. And I think the club on what they can do to better help him out so that the expectation isn't, all right, well, Ronald Acuña Jr. needs to get back, and that's when our season starts. It kind of felt like that in 2022, that there was just this wait and see. I mean, Ronald in 2021 was not a part of the World Series run, but he was putting together an MVP season before he got hurt. It's hard not to want to see that guy walk through the door, especially now as he comes through in 2025. He's been an MVP at this point. He's one of the most dynamic players in all of baseball. It's hard not to put those expectations on him. And Ronald, I think that he handled it very, very well in his media availability, just talking about, look, I want to help my team win. I will be ready when they call on me. And that, I think, is really the mantra for him. And Spencer Strider, who is one of the most, I think, thoughtful and articulate players that you will ever come across. He also, I think, understands that I just want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to come back and not have any setbacks whatsoever. That means not rushing it. And I think that's why both of those guys, when Alex Anthopoulos talked about it way, way, way back, I think in October, right after the season, we're not pushing these guys for opening day. And one of the reasons why he said that was, we don't want there to be okay, well, everybody's expecting them on opening day. And well, now all of a sudden they're not ready. And is it a setback? And do they have problems? And then they got to have all this discussion and all this narrative around, well, what are they not telling us? What's not going on? Why aren't they ready? Now I think it's these guys will let us know when they're ready. The medical staff will let us know when these players are ready. And at that point, they're not trying to bring them in with training wheels. They want to bring them back as close to full strength and full bore as possible. Will you handle Strider, I think, with kid gloves a little bit? Sure. Will you be mindful of Ronald Acuña Jr. and his body and what it tells you? Absolutely. But I don't think you want to take any chances with players as dynamic as Ronald Acuña Jr. and Spencer Strider. You want to get them in, get them locked in, and know that you've got them for the most important parts of the season. I mean, all the games, I guess, count the same, 1 through 162. But you want both these guys healthy to be factors in October, which is the Braves' ultimate goal, as we have talked about many times, including opening up this show.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the Braves and really Acuna himself too kind of learned from that first one. I mean, in the first time he came back sooner than a lot of us were expecting. And part of that is, he talked about it too. He wasn't in a healthy place having the game take away from him. He really wanted to get back as quickly as he could. But then throughout that season, clearly he wasn't himself. He kept having to miss time just kind of for maintenance on the knee. And they want to try to avoid that this time. And that's understandable. I think the other thing is too, as you mentioned, look, while I would have rather have Ronald in 2021, I think this team would have been good. You did win the World Series,
Yeah.
Without him. And while I would have loved to have Ronald and Spencer Strider last year, you still won 89 games and got to the postseason without him. And I don't say that to slight either of those two players, which I've already said I think are the two best players on the team. I say that because the rest of this team is still very good, and they're capable of holding things down until you can get those guys back healthy. And I think that does allow the Braves to be a little bit extra cautious with bringing them back. Again, knowing what happened the first time around with Ronald, just wasn't himself and just never got right. And also with Strider and arms in general, and having, I know it wasn't a full Tommy John, but a second major surgery on that elbow. You want to be extra careful with those guys. Last question I have on those two, though, for Ronald specifically, in his interview, he mentioned perhaps not running a little bit more. Did you get a sense of maybe we see a little bit different kind of version for Ronald, maybe even just this year, but coming back, could we see a Ronald that I don't know that he'll still 70 bags again, but I think even a lesser Ronald, maybe 30 steals. Do you get the sense of that maybe we might see a little bit different version of Ronald?
Yeah, I mean, it's about going at the right time. And keep in mind, I mean, his knee injuries, they're each different scenarios. I mean, the first one, he hurt leaping for a ball on the warning track. I mean, it wasn't like, hey, because he was running this. I mean, both of them were freak injuries. Let's put it that way. But I think that when asked about running, the expectation shouldn't be every year that he's going to steal 70 bases. I think that was the high water mark, but he can still do a lot of things, whether it's first to third, whether it is stealing bases. I mean, he kind of joked, all right, well, maybe I don't need to run as much if I've got Austin Riley and Matt Olson either on the base paths with me or perhaps clearing the bases, which both those guys are capable of doing. It's just all about getting Ronald on base, giving him those opportunities and picking and choosing his spots. Maybe that's going to be something that he does as he gets a little bit older, but I don't see this turning into Ronald might attempt 12 steals this year. We really just don't want him to run. This is a guy who has rehabbed and worked and basically said, hey, I'm about 90 or 95% just in terms of the overall physicality. Now, the tests, cutting back and forth in different directions, changing direction quickly, doing all the things to prove to himself and to the team that knee is ready. I think that's going to be a big focus of what he's doing here over the course of the spring. Watching him take batting practice, watching him run around a little bit and do his activities in that first few days of Braves camp. There's no brace on that knee. He was wearing a pad to make sure he didn't foul a ball off of it, because you could certainly do without that, because it's the front leg this time. And Jake, that might also be a thing that he's not going to have to torque quite the same way on the front leg. I don't know that it necessarily, or if this is just anecdotal in my mind, is going to be the same kind of challenge that maybe it was the last time. But either way, it's an incredible challenge. He has had to do a lot of work to get back, and he just wants to make sure that when he does, that he's the player that he wants to be. And I do, to answer your question, think stolen bases are still going to be a part of that game. He's coming back to be the club's right fielder as well. Let's not forget that. He's not coming back to become a full-time DH. That job is taken right now. So he's going to be out there running and doing baseball type things. That's who Ronald Acuña Jr. is. That's who the Braves need him to be, and that's exactly what's going to be asked of him again this year.
Yeah, you two excellent points there. One of them I was going to mention is the fact that the DH spot is taken, so he has to play in the field. And the Braves, and part of being extra cautious is because they got to make sure that it can play in the field. The other thing you did mention that I hadn't thought about is that it is that front knee this time. And last time, with it being that back knee, that knee that you're turn on, and you are getting more of that torque on. That's where we saw some of the power get zapped away. So, hopefully that does help a little bit, but either way, I'm fully confident in Ronald. He works so hard. He wants to play the game so well. Him and Strider both, guys that just love the game, and Strider just his mentality of it. So can't wait to have either of them back. All right, next I want to get into the rotation battle. Two guys, Ian Anderson, Grant Holmes, been a lot of talk about them already in spring training. Are they the favorites for the rotation spots coming out of spring training? We'll discuss that here next. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's perfect grab and go snack for me for those busy days, whether snacking at my desk while I'm working here, on a road trip, or taking the kids to school. But if you are still looking for that crack every time that you open up a shell and getting that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein, providing all 9 essential amino acids. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping the kids off like me, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. Get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you as always, making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. Go check out Grant and everything that he has going on for you as well. Grant McAuley on X, and obviously is from the Diamond Podcast, where he gives you a lot of great Braves insight. All right, Grant, next thing I wanted to talk about here is the rotation battle. Outside of seeing the health of Ronald and Spencer Strider, which is what I'll be super focused on in spring training, I think the other very intriguing actual position battle is in the rotation, which it might not be much of a battle, at least to begin the season. And there's a lot of talk that Grant Holmes, Ian Anderson are going to get those final 2 rotation spots, with both of those guys being out of options. I want to start with Grant Holmes, Grant, because there seems to be a lot of optimism that Grant Holmes can take what we saw kind of in short spurts last year. And I don't want to say fully do a Ronaldo Lopez here, because we have seen him start a little bit last year and they had already kind of started working him into that rotation. But it sounds like they feel really confident in him, to the point where we've now heard Alex say several times that in free agency, they're trying to look at who can we get that we actually think is better than Grant Holmes, which to me says they think very highly of this guy making that transition into a full-time starting pitcher.
Yeah, I don't think there's really any question about, the opportunity that Grant Holmes has in spring training, and really what he showed in 2024, wherever the Braves needed him to be. If that was coming in as a multi-inning option out of the bullpen, or getting a start on about 30 minutes notice with your postseason hopes on the line, Grant Holmes answered that call. And I think that there's nothing fluky about the numbers. I mean, Jake, you start to look at both what we saw from what they call the back of the baseball card perspective, or just the advanced metrics. This is a guy that gets a lot of swing and miss. And, these are the kind of pitchers you want to have on your staff. Now, I don't know that he's necessarily going to prove himself as the 25 to 30 start guy this year, but I'm not going to rule it out. And I do think he has an important role to play on this Braves pitching staff one way or another. And he's shown that he has that versatility. So Grant Holmes, to me, he's got a spot locked up, but where exactly it'll be over the course of the year, I think we could still be finding that out. But if he's able to go out and perform as a starting pitcher the way he did in flashes last year, it's worth finding out what you have. And I think the Braves definitely wanted to do that. Now, Ian Anderson is a different story. He's basically had 2 completely lost seasons as far as the major league level is concerned, missing the majority of 2023 after getting Tommy John surgery in April, coming back and getting 14 or so starts, at least a dozen in the minor league level last year, to work himself up to be ready to start this spring training, have a healthy winter, all of those things. I think that's an ultimate benefit for Ian Anderson. I talked to both of these guys. Grant Holmes is ready to do whatever the Braves are asking him to do, but Ian Anderson's a different animal. I mean, this is a guy that was a big part of what the Braves did in the postseason in his rookie year of 2020 and in 2021. I know some folks have kind of looked at it like, well, that was a long time ago, and kind of dismissed it out of hand, but I still think this is somebody that's got some upside. He's 27 years old, so it's not like he's long in the tooth. But as you mentioned, he is out of options. You've got to figure out where exactly he can fit. And the Braves, I think, need to answer that question early on. And a good spring would go a long way towards propelling Ian Anderson to the place he wants to be this year, because he very much wants to get back into that rotation. And it would be a great story of redemption to have him finally return. And whether he recaptures that postseason form or not, that's a pretty high bar. But to be a useful starting pitcher in the big leagues, I don't think that's asking too much from Ian Anderson, but I can understand. I mean, you lose a Max Fried, you lose a Charlie Morton, you don't see another major league free agent come in, or another big trade that was made to bring in a proven major league starter. These are legitimate questions for the Braves rotation. As you look at it from 30,000 feet, though, You got what Spencer Schwellenbach did last year, what Reynaldo Lopez did, and you're bringing back the National League Cy Young Award winner, and his name is not Spencer Strider, who will also be back a little bit later. The Braves are in a pretty good place. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of upside here, but you're not really going to feel much. You're not going to feel completely at ease until you see these guys go out there and do it. And of course, as we've said, and I don't want to get back into this habit this year, I really would like to table the discussion altogether. Stay healthy over the course of the year. That's a big thing, obviously, for Ian Anderson and for the rest of the Braves rotation, for that matter.
Yeah, I put that disclaimer at the front of my last podcast. It's something I want to stop saying because as I started, again, I already broke the rule and said at the beginning of this podcast, that's what every team is saying. We need to stay healthy. That is what every team is shooting for. But for Grant Holmes, I think you do treat it kind of like Reynaldo Lopez going into this year, the same way you did last year. If it works out as a starter, fantastic. If not, you know what he can do in a bullpen role. So like you said, I think there is a spot there for Grant Holmes either way. For Ian Anderson, maybe he could transition to that bullpen role if needed. I think best case scenario, if you want to be really optimistic here, they both throw the ball well in spring training and into the season. Strider comes back and maybe the Braves can work with a 6-man rotation a little bit to try to limit some of those innings. I think that's best case scenario, but I am looking forward to seeing what both of those guys do in spring training. I think there'll be a lot of eyes on them. I think Ian Anderson, like you said, because he hasn't pitched at this level for so long. I think you make another good point in here too, though, is that, even Anderson, even 2 or 3 years ago, the Braves were really looking at him to be a mid-rotation starter. They're really just looking at him to be a 5th, maybe even 6th starter, like I just said at this point. He doesn't have to be that guy to carry the rotation at the top. He just needs to be a serviceable big league starter, and I think that's within his realm of possibility. I think there's some added motivation for him too, because look, he got snubbed for a postseason start last year. He had a pretty good ending in Gwinnett. Now, he still had trouble with the walks, but overall wasn't giving him a lot of hits, wasn't giving up a lot of runs. And then with the young guy and AJ Smith-Shawver, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with this next is, if it's not Grant Holmes, if it's not Ian Anderson, who do you think it is that next guy up?
Yeah, AJ Smith-Shawver, clearly, I mean, if the Braves going to give him a postseason start, why wouldn't they give him a look in April to be their 5th and or 6th starter as the year goes on? And I want to kind of circle back to some of the depth in just a moment, whether it's, Hurston Waldrop or Bryce Elder or whoever it may be, maybe somebody else that just kind of proves himself at AAA and is able to catapult into the Braves' plans. Because I don't know that anybody, too many people this time a year ago were thinking about Spencer Schwellenbach doing the kind of things he did last year. He was under the radar. Maybe somebody else is as well. But that 5th and 6th spot in the rotation, I think, is going to be a conversation we talk about a lot over the course of the year. I asked Brian Snitker about it at the winter meetings, and I checked in with him and with Alex Anthopoulos, who I got to catch up with down at Braves spring training. They still look at it as smart, and I guess if you want to call it good business for the Chris Sales, the Reynaldo Lopez, the Spencer Schwellenbachs, whoever it may be. And, oh, yeah, by the way, that guy who's returning Spencer Strider, to try to be smart about when they can add that extra arm to the rotation. Now, it can be an absolute pain from all the roster moves and management. Alex Anthopoulos, I think, recognized how challenging that could be, but they also recognized the benefits from it. And I know there were some rough starts in there, but there were an awful lot of serviceable or better starts in there. So it can be a mixed bag. But if you have the right guys in, and now Grant Holmes is a little bit more of a known commodity, if Ian Anderson can come back and step up, if AJ Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrop or Bryce Elder or whoever it's going to be, and I know some of those names are more popular than others, can just give the Braves, as close to a quality start as possible to allow for the big 4, if you want to call them that. I may be the first person that calls them that, but Strider, Sale, Schwellenbach, and Lopez, that's a really good starting 4. You keep those guys healthy, get them into October, you're going to feel awfully good about your chances. Now, that's been easier said than done, but I do think that, quote unquote, 6-man rotation, if you will, is something the Braves are very much thinking about. And I guess to go back and answer that question in terms of, who might be the next in line, I would think AJ Smith-Shawver is probably at the front of the short line right now after Grant Holmes and Ian Anderson to start the season, at least before Spencer Strider gets back.
I would think so as well. Like you said, you made the point. You were willing to give him a postseason start with how well he threw the ball at AAA at the end of his season too, which is why I think he earned that opportunity. I think, he would be the next guy in there. But obviously Ian Anderson, Grant Holmes, with them being out of options, kind of in a way gives them a leg up, but I still think they're going to have to earn it in spring training. Another point too I want to make before we move on here is hopefully the offense is going to be better this year too, and it won't put so much stress on the pitching staff. I mean, you had to pitch almost a perfect game last year in order to get a win as a Braves pitcher. I'm hoping that it won't be the case this year with the offense back and healthy and ready to go. Next, I do want to wrap up and just get Grant's overall thoughts, anything that he saw at spring training that stood out. We'll get into that here next. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action, and if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. And if you're already over the NBA season like me, you want to get geared up for the MLB season, they have awards odds out there, World Series awards, division winners odds, all of that you can see over at FanDuel.com. Also, make sure you visit FanDuel.com/playsafe for tools and resources to help you stay in control of the way you play. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, Grant, I want to wrap up with two more questions. First one is, another thing that I'm really interested in spring training is Tim Hyers. And what does he look like, talking with the guys? What is he kind of preaching to them? I don't know, how in depth you got to go with him or hearing those conversations, but what has been your early take on Tim Hyers?
Yeah, I got to chat a little bit with Tim Hyers, hear a lot from him down at Braves spring training. And, we're there so early, and this is kind of the first look for everybody, the first impression that everyone gets to make with one another. But his first impression of these Braves hitters is this is an incredibly talented group. And if there's anything that, and I asked Matt Olson about this and Austin Riley about this in particular, that the new voice and or the new message, and Brian Snitker for that matter, I also talked to him about it in depth, because it's a pretty, I don't want to say monumental change, but the Kevin Seitzer regime, if you will, it yields some pretty incredible highs. Now, 2024 admittedly was a low for the Braves offense. If they could somehow strike the difference between 2023 and 2024, they'd be a pretty darn good offense, but they've got to figure out how to make that happen. And I think the one thing that everybody seemed to come back to was staying in the moment, being more present, understanding the situation, and not trying to do too much. That may sound like the most cliched baseball answer ever. I 100% understand that. But whether I was talking to guys last year or kind of renewing these conversations again this year, obviously no one person had the answer to turn things around last year, whether that was an individual player, a hitting coach, a hitting instructor, or anybody else that any of these individual players are working with, by the way, to try to recreate and to, fix their swings, air quotes, if you want to call it that. I really think, situational hitting is not necessarily something that comes easy to everybody, particularly when we're talking about human beings who might just be feeling some added pressure or placing some added pressure on themselves in those situations. And those moments, obviously, for the Braves last year, a lot of times were just bigger than whoever was up there at that particular moment. And sometimes, I guess maybe that's your lot in life for some years. Other years, maybe you're the 2023 Braves or the 27 Yankees or whoever it is you want to point at. But there's more talent in that room than we saw results-wise last year. And I think Tim Hyers recognizes that, and he just wants to help guys with the mentality and with the situational awareness to put themselves in the best position to succeed. So I hope that answered the question. I think that Tim Hyers is the guy that can bring a track record of doing these kinds of things elsewhere and just bringing in new message and a new voice. And sometimes that's just necessary.
Yeah, I think that was really the case. Like you said, Kevin Seitzer, he had some great years. I still believe he's a great hitting coach. It's just at some point you need to hear a new voice. And I think that's what it's going to be for Tim Hyers. I don't expect it to change too drastically. Like the guys you have, they fit a certain profile that you went out and got, and a profile that's been very successful. But hopefully it does help get some of these guys back on track. The last thing I wanted to ask you is just, is there anything or anyone that really stood out to you in spring training that we haven't covered yet?
No, I don't really think so. I think really as you came in, you wanted to get the health discussions out of the way. You wanted to hear from Ronald Acuña Jr., hear from Spencer Strider, to watch guys, doing baseball type things again. Ian Anderson was another guy that it was good to see him throwing off the mound again. And I think there's a lot of I guess, quantity for the Braves to go through to try to fill some of their bullpen vacancies. I got to catch up with a few of those guys, including Chasen Shreve, who I covered way back when he broke in 2014. He's in camp on a non-guaranteed deal or a minor league deal and a non-roster invite to maybe be somebody that can help out from the left side. No H.A. Minter, that's a big change. No Joe Jimenez was not something that the Braves had anticipated going into the offseason that they'd be staring at this year. But once he got his knee fixed, they realized it was a little bit more serious than even Joe felt that it was as he pitched through it last year. So there's going to be some opportunity in that bullpen. We'll see who's able to step up there. We'll also see, any major league free agents that haven't signed yet that might find a home with the Braves, and some of those moves that can happen at the end of camp where maybe a player doesn't fit somewhere else and could fit in with Atlanta. I'm anxious to see all of that, and I think we're all excited to see, starting on Saturday, some regular Braves games going on, some scores to look at, some box scores to maybe spend too much time staring at, and seeing some of these positional battles come together, at least, I guess, roster battles on the pitching side. And we didn't even talk about Jurickson Profar. I think that getting him, if that's the one big move you made, it addressed something that the Braves very much needed, and that was, how do we get through in the outfield without Ronald Acuña Jr.? And then when he gets back, maybe you've got the best outfield in baseball. Ronald Acuña Jr. said he certainly thinks so. So those are a few things that I took away from Braves camp, but anxious to see everybody get out there and hopefully get through a nice, healthy spring training and hit the regular season in stride and keep this group together. Sean Murphy, the kind of the last one I'll throw out there, he had a lost season in 2024, said that even though he was healthy, his swing wasn't where he needed it to be at all. That's no surprise. If you look at the numbers, it's there. But 2 months off with that oblique injury right after you just ramped up for the year, he was behind the 8 ball all season long. They're going to be counting on him to be the workhorse. I'd like to see him step up and do that because he wants to get himself back to the level that the Braves expected him to be and the level that I think he's very much capable of, and the Braves need it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this season for Sean Murphy because I was really big on him going into last year, and then he gets hurt on opening day. And then, as you said, it was just kind of a lost season after that. And he's got a little bit of a young buck that's pushing behind him too, as well. And Drake Baldwin already a little bit of hype for him in camp. But I think Sean Murphy is certainly going to be the guy. We're probably going to see him get the Bolt for the first time. He's really had to split duties with Travis d'Arnaud for the last couple of years now. So I'm excited for the season for Sean Murphy. Well, Grant, thanks so much for joining, sharing some of your insight down from spring training. Certainly would love to have you back on again before the season gets going. It won't be too much longer now, but I am excited to get spring training games underway. So we at least have something like a lot of spring training games on TV this year, which would be great for fans to view. But make sure you do follow Grant if you don't already on X at Grant McAuley. Make sure you check out his podcast From the Diamond, where he'll share a lot of great Braves information with you this upcoming season. Well, as always, thanks for joining us here at Locked On Braves. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube if you're new. Hit that thumbs up button. Leave me a comment down below. Make sure you subscribe or follow us rather on social media at shortstopball at LockedOn_Braves. And make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast. And we will talk to you next time.